Hey everyone, welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm John Boydnott, your host. Today I'm joined by Sebastian Pfeiffer of ICN over in Europe. Hi Sebastian, how are you?
Hey John, thanks for having me. Hi everybody, thanks for listening in. Really great, fantastic opportunity to be here.
Great to have you. And so tell us all about yourself and tell us about ICN, which stands for Impossible Cloud Network. What do you guys do?
Right, so maybe starting with myself quickly, Sebastian, I have a business background. I was in management consulting for a good amount of time before I got intrigued by this amazing opportunity that we get to talk about today. And the Possible Cloud Network, or ICN in short, as you said, what we do is essentially we're building a decentralized version of AWS, but hopefully much more than that. So we call it the evolution of the cloud, actually, which is stands for three things, which is composable, permissionless, and truly open.
All right, great. Well, there is a dependence these days on AWS, and it's other centralized cloud providers like them, but there are some problems with that. So you might call it a ticking time bomb. What are your thoughts around that? What are those issues?
Yeah, John, thanks for the question. I think it's a great introduction question. So maybe let's take a step back and first understand what cloud actually means, right? I mean, everybody kind of talks about it and it sort of knows, but nobody really knows. So in simple terms, it means that you rent space from someone else's computer or more likely an advanced version of that. So for instance, if you use iCloud, you rent space from Apple or their partners' hardware to store your data, right? So without getting too technical, I do want to add that there's like different abstraction levels. There's bare metal, there's platform, or there's like even software, right? And to make this a bit more interesting for the listener as well, it's one of the fastest growing markets in the world, right? So it's tremendously big. So 2024, the number I have top of my head is around 330 billion USD was the revenue amount for infrastructure alone. And on top of that, it's growing. It keeps growing 30% year over year, right? So in short, it's a very large and attractive market. Now, with that context, I think it makes it more clear, your introductory question, why this might be a concern to have the ownership of this amazing market with only a few companies, right? So especially from the same country where that originates. So independent of politics, I think this degree of market concentration is not a great idea, right? More specifically, maybe three aspects I want to highlight here. One is the vendor lock-in, right? So how does it work? Usually, when a startup is founded, maybe also for entrepreneurs here listening in, you get free credits, right? What does it mean? You go to AWS, you get, let's say, 100,000 USD worth of credits that you can use for AWS services. Now, what that allows you to do is very cheaply, arguably, right? Very cost efficiently to build your services. To build your business with these services, right? So this traps you in. On the other hand, so once you have built your architecture on the AWS and the costs actually come in, that's when you're locked in, right? The second thing is I want to mention is the dependence on a single provider. So outages affect global digital infrastructure. So in the Web3 context, the exchanges Binance and Kraken were actually affected just recently, which you might have read about. But there's essential services like healthcare as well that might be affected. And the third one is data sovereignty. So especially because these services coming out of the US, from a European perspective, they threaten, in a sense, digital sovereignty and privacy, right? So it's bad enough with social media if somebody steps in, but with your business data, I think it's a different story, right? But there is decentralized alternatives, and that's what we're here to talk about today, right?
Nice, nice. So yeah, obviously the Web3 ecosystem going to be affected very much by that disruption in the services of Binance and Kraken, and so that's definitely a red flag for the entire Web3 ecosystem, right? Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this. I mean, first of all, let me go in and say AWS outages actually happen more often than you think. It's just not services that the average user is affected by, right? So myself, for instance, I think Slack is down every once in a while, to be honest. Now, what this exposes the particular example, John, is that it's kind of this, if you will, a contradiction, a critical contradiction in a sense, because Web3 is all about decentralization, But it
Mm,
turns out that a lot of Web3 is actually running on Web2 infrastructure, right?
mm,
I mean, we pointed out it works, right? So once you're locked in, everything runs smoothly. Yes, it's cost expensive, but it kind of works, right? That's why all of these services are there. But Web3 really often just relies on the centralized hosting providers with a lot of risks, right? So that you have the operational risk. You rely on their uptime. Actually, a few providers uptime, right? You have bottlenecks. Essentially, if one infrastructure is down, this cascades down to decentralized applications that run of these other services. You have this huge credibility gap that I pointed out, right? So it kind of undermines the whole ethos, the decentralization narrative,
yeah.
when these downtimes occurs, right?
Yeah, so AI. Mean, where does AI? So AI's got to come in here too. In every conversation I ever do with anybody nowadays, which is just fine. So it's growing rapidly, and data centers may not be able to handle all of the the load, keeping up with the demand on that. So how sustainable is this infrastructure? This the way older infrastructure, and so how is it going to affect AI's development? Where do you see all that going?
Yeah, there's an interesting quote I heard where AWS plans to spend, I think, in excess of like 100 billion in infrastructure investment just this year, which is
Wow.
just is enormous figure if you think about it. Like, how much money is that, right? And still, that same AWS stated that they won't be able to keep up with demand despite this investment. And that, I think, shows the limitation of scalability that these centralized providers are in. Yeah. So maybe just to put this one level lower, right? What does it mean in terms of scalability limits, right? So you have geographical reach, of course. So I think AWS keep coming back to this. I think they have like maybe around 30 server locations around the world, right? Which is not that much if you think about it. So actually, depending on the type of service you're using, latency at some point becomes an issue. Then you have power constraints. So because of these central locations where everything comes together, there is a strain on the energy grid on the ground, right? I mean, there's famous examples where AWS actually can't expand because the energy is just limited where it's at. And then maybe a last one that also touches upon that investment aspect, which is it's not really a level playing field, right? So coming back to your AI question, is you have to have these massive investments for this hardware in order to be able to compete with these, right? So unless you have these billion investment structures, it's kind of difficult and from the outset skewed towards decentralized providers, right? So in essence, I think decentralization shows that it actually slows innovation and it limits participation and locks out a broader development developer and research community. And that's where I think decentralized infrastructure could come in and better help scale.
So how is decentralization going to better help scale? How is it going to make a difference for having enough energy to for AI to continue to advance and all of that?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the in the essence, decentralization is about decentralized ownership, right? So you essentially rely on, or you not rely, but you allow others to contribute to the network. And what
Mm.
this allows, it's kind of the Airbnb model, if you will, right? Instead of having one hotel, you have several locations of the rooms and apartments. And it's the same here, right? So instead of having 30 locations, you could have hundreds of locations around the world, which then don't put, coming back to the energy example, don't put such a strain on those central locations on the energy grid on the ground.
Yep. So, and also for this, centralized the cloud. For there's obviously centralized cloud is sort of dominant, and there's a concern around control and monopoly and all of that. So, how can what ICN is working on, with decentralization, how can that mitigate those monopolistic tendencies?
Right. So I think that there's a few aspects to this. So we have essentially three layers. that allow everybody to contribute. And I think I just want to highlight these three layers, which then
Yeah.
makes it maybe easier to understand on why this provides a benefit, right? Again, coming to the evolution of the cloud. First of all, it allows on the hardware side anybody to contribute, right? So as I mentioned, more locations, energy is one example. There's also the example of latency, which essentially comes back to the fact that when you have more locations, it's easier to distribute load across the network, right? Potentially more closer to you. Then there is this is the hardware level. The second level is the service level, right? So what we do is essentially we then, in a permissionless way, allow anybody to access this hardware according to their needs, right? So we essentially provide this level playing field because you don't need all these resources. You could just use the network's resource. And then the third one is essentially we call them hyper nodes. They ensure that all of the system is up and running. Um, you can envision it like a typical validator or checker node in essence. And with these three elements, I think we have an open, composable ecosystem that will thrive with the more users that are actually participating.
Got it. Well, now, how is this the EU versus the US? I imagine the US is a little bit sort of more not running behind on this, but let's just say that the EU may be paving the way a little bit more than the US is. Describe that, and is that true? And what is your view around that, and all of that?
Right. I mean, I have to be careful here, John, with you, coming from the West Coast.
It's okay. I'm on the West Coast. It's almost like we're halfway between uh, wherever the U.S. is and where Europe is. But yeah, not to get too political.
um, anyway, so yeah, I think what let me provide one example. I think that just makes clear why Europe needs to step up, and this is actually a good opportunity to step up. Stablecoins, right? So for everybody that's familiar with Web3, stablecoins is just it's the currency, right? So pretty much almost all of the invoices, I would say, all of our invoices are paid in stablecoins. Now, nobody really questions that these stablecoins are US pegged, right? USD pegged. There is actually a version of this that's EU Euro backed, but nobody's really using this, right? So I think that just exemplifies how ahead the market already is, and away from the European market. Now, why is this a great opportunity? I think that coming back to cloud, yes, the EU missed the Web 2 wave, right? We don't really have a hyperscaler cloud platform. However, Web 3 enables us in a much more rapid way to essentially leapfrog and catch up, right? Potentially even go beyond those traditional infrastructure cloud services. Then the second one I would say is Web3 is very much aligned with the thinking here around data sovereignty and GDPR because of this transparency, because of this data ownership, right? Um, I think those aspects coming together offer show what a great opportunity this is, and I'm actually very excited that this is such a momentum now, with with several figures stepping in and realizing, okay, we need to catch up, and Web3 I think is the avenue to achieve that.
Mm. And hopefully, your company ICN will be sort of there to help in this area, take
I
advantage of the
appreciate that.
opportunity. Yeah. So decentralization, there are, what are some myths about decentralization that may not be true, may or may not be true, that you would like to address? And yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that's always the one of the most interesting questions for the users, for the listeners. So I think that starting one, I would say, is that Web3 is all about, um, especially the cloud sense. It's literally just people sharing their laptops, or available disk space to the network, right? That's all Web3 is about. And what we actually did is we came from the other end and said, okay, what is the market usually composed of? It's businesses using these cloud services, right? And what do they need? They're not at the very least, they would have question marks when they store the data on anybody's, lab available disk space. Well, we said, okay, what do they need? Is they need certification, they need latency, availability, all these things, which is found in data centers. So actually, we cooperate very much with data centers. Actually, only we vet them before, and then they can contribute, or people in these data centers then contribute the hardware. So I would say that's myth number one. It's not just about retail hardware; it's actually very, very professional hardware
Mm.
that's put on the system. Um, I think the second one, it kind of goes in the same direction, would be that it's the performance, or if you want to leverage the Web3 benefits, you need to sacrifice on the typical performance metrics that are tracked. So what do I mean by this? Web3 does not have to be complicated. So actually, if you go to our service provider, which is Impossible Cloud, right? We have it's very easy to use. It's very easy to onboard, and actually, depending on where you are, it's faster than AWS, right? So I think that shows that actually Web3 can achieve great things without sacrifice, right? That's also one of our mantras, which is we don't sacrifice in performance while building on the benefits of Web3. And then the last one is, I would say, is probably around that Web3 is only for idealistic folks, right?
Mm.
So I would say that at least the majority of the industry is very idealistic driven, which I appreciate. I think there is a very smart people with great visions. But what we have in mind is more of a pragmatic approach, right? So let's see what works well, what doesn't yet work well in the Web3 industry, and let's take it step by step, right? So I would say that we are very product driven, pragmatic approach with the real world adoption. I mean, I haven't mentioned this at the beginning, but we have more than 1,000 businesses actually using our service already, which shows you that you can achieve great things if you take it step by step, right? Yeah, I think those three myths pretty much cover it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I could ask you sort of where ICN is going to be, where your company is going to be in the next, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So let me wrap that into just a question about what does the future of the cloud look like, and how are you guys going to be involved?
Um, Easy question. Yeah. So, what does the future of the cloud look like? So, see, I think, I mean, maybe talking about ICN, starting with ICN, I think we've done one service, right? But that's not a holistic cloud. We need more services. And I think we also need to allow anybody really to build on top of that. That's, I think, where the holy grail comes in. So, at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to be able to, in order to compete with traditional cloud, AWS is like 200 plus services, right? No single company could ever build that. Now, are all of those needed? That's a different question. But the point of it is you need a great ecosystem that's jointly contributing towards this. And we're launching in, let's say, end of Q2, around that time. And once we launch, I think we have the foundation, and then we need to scale this, right? And what makes us different, as mentioned, is we're modular and composable, again, allowing everybody to contribute. But the getting this permissionless and open ecosystem going in 2 to 3 years hopefully will be achieved, and by then we will have this multi-service ecosystem. um, this is community owned, right? So again, in essence, fully alongside the Web3 DNA, um, we're making sure that anybody can contribute in this ecosystem and no single entity is in charge, right? So I think 2 to 3 years from now, I think we'll have captured a lot of more market share in the sense of competing with traditional cloud, and we'll be able to onboard many more users contributing to that. That's where I think decentralized cloud will be going.
Yeah, no, the future of the cloud. Well, what about a little further out, maybe 5, 6 years? Not even your company, but cloud in general. Will things be more idealistic, or what are you thinking?
So, I'd, actually,
Hard to tell.
I'd like to take, I'd like to piggyback here on a quote I once heard, where essentially the barcode. is not a technology you think of and you use it every day. Yeah.
Mm,
So ideally, at one stage, we come to a state where you simply use Web3 products without even knowing that they're Web3 products, right? You just use them. And this holds true for the cloud. I think, at least for our services, some of it already, right? But going forward, if you choose between us or AWS or something, you just choose based on what you like, yeah, not because of idealistic principles. I think these are very valid arguments, right? It's very connected to Web3. So in the future, this should be just a standalone argument. Do you want this? Yes, no. And then you use it. You don't even know it's Web3.
yeah. Okay. For ICN and you, what's the best way folks out there can learn more about ICN and entrepreneurs out there can potentially use your services? And how can they get a hold of you?
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, everybody that's interested, go to icn.global. We have all our socials on there. We do also have classical email, for the old school people like me.
The Web 2 people?
Yeah, and feel free to reach out. Our services are available to anybody. You just literally have to connect with an email, and that's it. Yeah, and looking forward to anybody that wants to contribute.
Sebastian Pfeiffer from ICN, great to have you on From the Ground Up.
Thank you, John. Thanks for everybody for listening in.